Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and today we're going to continue looking at the M1 Mac Mini. If you didn't see my last video on this, feel free to check it out for an introduction to the series. But just as a quick point, the target audience for this video and this series is PC users who may be considering picking up this M1 Mac Mini, and more specifically for this video, PC DaVinci Resolve users who might be considering switching to the Mac Mini. Because today I'll be looking at how DaVinci Resolve works on this system and sharing my experience with using it to edit my last two videos posted to my channel. So the agenda. First, I'll give you a little background on my DaVinci Resolve background. Then we'll look at my actual editing workflow for two complete edits. We'll take a look at how it compares to a comparably priced PC. I'll let you know the strong points and the not so strong points of editing on the Mac, and I'll conclude by addressing whether or not I think it lives up to some of the hype surrounding it and if it's worth buying to use as an editing computer. So I guess it's important to start off by saying I am not a Resolve professional, but I do use Resolve professionally. Does that make sense? I have no formal training in DaVinci Resolve. Everything I know I've learned from just using it, reading the manual, and well, YouTube. I have been using it practically daily for the past year and a half, but I'd consider myself an amateur Resolve user. As far as the footage I edit, I have two Panasonic Lumix mirrorless cameras, an FZ300, and my main camera is a G7. And the video formats I typically use is 4K 30 FPS H.264 420 8-bit for A-roll and 1080p H.264 or AVCHD either 30 or 60 FPS depending on the shot for B-roll. As far as my editing style, it's what I call lazy brute force editing. I edit 4K projects on a 4K timeline. I don't transcode first or use optimized media. Except for the AVCHD footage, I just edit the H.264 straight from the camera. I don't proxy render anything to cache except for fusion clips. I don't use the cut tab at all. I don't typically create multicam clips unless I'm using more than two camera angles. Typically, I just have a main cam shot and an overhead camera. So I just stack them on two tracks and stack B-roll or stock footage on a third. I know this isn't a real professional or system efficient editing workflow, but just to let you in on a little secret, video editing is my least favorite part of my job. Not that I hate video editing, I just don't want to spend all my time editing the videos every week. So to help get it done quickly and smoothly, I have a very powerful PC to basically brute force my way through a project. Now, this type of workflow can't possibly work on this base model Mac Mini, can it? You may be surprised. Okay, intro done. Now, like I explained in the previous video, this is about taking you, the audience, along with me as I experience my workflow on an entirely new device and ecosystem. So that's what the middle part here is. I'm gonna spend a little longer going over my experience of editing with Resolve on the Mac than I typically would and take you through all the good, the bad, and the in between. Now, it'd be great if you watch the whole video, but I'm a realist, so I've included plenty of chapter markers, so feel free to skip around to any points of interest. Now, I originally recorded all of this like this, just talking to the camera as I worked, but I ended up with over 12 hours of footage, so instead I'm gonna cover me up with me and go over some of the highlights in those 12 hours of footage. So let's just get into it and look at the first project, which was the Mac Mini Round 2 video from last week. Now, this was a very basic project and consisted of a single main cam, 4K 30 FPS X.264 footage, and 1080p screen capture footage I captured with OBS. Now, I didn't optimize anything here, but I kept the project pretty simple while still being able to see what the system can handle. I created a 4K project and a 4K timeline. I did some minor color correction to the clips prior to editing anything, but I kept it to a single node with just some very minor curve corrections. I only used a few of the basic Resolve transitions. Timeline scrubbing and playback was smooth throughout the entire project, and this ended up being a 30-minute video. The audio was very responsive to Fairlight controls. The editing process was smooth, no complaints. The rendering or delivery, that's where I ran into some problems. So first, I output the project with the same YouTube 4K default I always use on my PC using the H.265 codec. I output the H.265 because I find it to be a better container for 4K YouTube content. Whatever YouTube does to a video, it seems to do it less to H.265 video, despite the H.264 recommendation. Now at first, everything seemed to go okay. The 30-minute project output the H.265 in 20 minutes, not too bad, but when I opened up the file to look at the results, it was garbage. The quality was just bad. The still parts of the background and foreground were fine, but the moving elements, well, me and my face, were just a compressed mess. There's a ton of artifacting, especially in my face. The video just wasn't usable. So I tried again, and since I'm on a Mac, I decided to see how well this M1 could output ProRes 422, and it couldn't. Something went wrong, and although the timer was still ticking up and Resolve hadn't crashed, the rendering process had definitely stopped for some reason. So I tried again, and this time there was a true failure. And this time there was a very clear reason. Resolve wanted to use 13.41 gigabytes of memory on a system with only 8 gigabytes of memory. So attempt 3 was just the basic YouTube H.264 preset and failed due to lack of memory again. Now, I started to get a bit frustrated, but I didn't grab the whiskey bottle. I just started troubleshooting. Not enough memory. I was afraid that despite everything I heard about the base model, so I opened up the system monitor and went to the memory tab. And I apologize, I wasn't screen recording here, but I saw that although only like 3 gigabytes of system memory was in use, the swap used, or the memory that's actually swapped out to a file on the system SSD, was at almost 5 gigabytes. That was weird. So I quit and rebooted this system, and the memory was clear. So it seems, unlike in Windows or Linux, quitting an app or killing a process in Mac OS doesn't wipe the swap file. And I did completely quit Resolve each time, process terminated. Now, I'm sure the Mac users watching will let me know how stupid I am for not knowing that, but for the rest of us on this base model Mac with limited memory, once you're done editing before you're about to output the project, just reboot the system to avoid any memory errors. Anyway, that issue was fixed. I went back and tried again, but this time I got that render lag out issue again 3 more times, and I am kind of stupid for not figuring this one out a lot sooner, and I actually figured out kind of by accident. So I noticed the system was pulling about 40 watts while rendering in ProRes, and the Mac itself was getting pretty warm. So I was just thinking through potential problems, one of which may have been thermal throttling, because I really hadn't felt the system get warm at all up to that point. So while I was checking the CPU and GPU usage, I reached over and touched the Mac, and it was warm, not hot, but getting there. And as an afterthought, I felt the external NVMe drive enclosure, this drive enclosure, and this puppy was on fire, like hotter than I've ever felt an NVMe drive. So it had nothing to do with the computer or Resolve. It's just this M.2 drive enclosure sucks. And my SSD that I was reading from and writing to was overheating. So I got this actively cooled enclosure, which more than solved that issue. It wasn't the drive itself, I've tested it, but don't buy this enclosure. So with all that fixed, I finally got the project rendered out in 21 minutes and 7 seconds. And then I realized I forgot my Fusion clip overlay, so I went back, I added them, just a simple delta keyer, rendered again, and it only added about 30 seconds. So that was the first project, just a quick and dirty, jumped in to see what I could do. The next project was the PC build RGB case fan review video I just posted. And for this one, I was a bit more professional with my workflow. It is a 4K project, however, this time I did edit on a 1080p timeline because this project consisted of 2 camera tracks, some fusion work, a B-roll montage piece with graded overlays, simple text boxes, stock footage, full normalization, balance, and color grading. Basically about as complex as I get with an edit for a YouTube video. The first thing I tried, just out of curiosity, was to see how Resolve and the Mac Mini would handle the raw AVCHD, and yeah, it sucked, but no surprise there. I don't even work with it in raw form on my workstation. I wouldn't use it at all, except it's the best quality 60 FPS footage my cameras will output. So I optimized these clips for use in the timeline. I went with Prores 422 proxy and all the clips optimized in under 2 minutes. Now, I ended up editing the whole B-roll montage in a separate timeline using the proxy footage, but in the end, I decided to output that sequence as individual H.264 clips and imported it into my main project. I just did this because I planned on exporting this entire project in its final form and importing it into a few different computers for comparison. And on a PC, I can't optimize media as ProRes. It'd be DNx. So I just wanted to be able to bring the entire timeline into another system and use it like it was actually created on that system for a true apples to apples comparison. For the fusion elements, they're seemingly pretty simple callouts on the surface, but they are a bit complex for infographics. I think just one of these callouts contains like 24 or 25 fusion tools. Plus I added trackers and keyframing. Now this entire fusion workflow was pretty smooth and the Mac handled it well, but I could tell that I was on the edge of what the system could handle. So if you use Fusion for infographics, the experience was good, but if you go more in depth with Fusion, like a 3D composition, you may find this system a bit sluggish to work on. But these clips did render to cache relatively quickly and smoothly, without affecting timeline performance as I continued with the edit. Ultimately, I had no issues working in the timeline. As far as colorist work, again, I'm not a professional Resolve colorist, but I did spend some time adjusting my footage. I realize all my waveforms and scopes are on the second monitor, so you can't really see them, but in short, I normalized, adjusted contrast, balanced, and then color corrected each step on a separate node. I was able to easily grab a still and apply the grade to all the frames in the shot. Now, again, I did edit this project in a 1080p timeline, and even after color grading, working back in the edit tab was smooth. However, I did occasionally switch the timeline to 4K, and it was also responsive and easy to work with until I applied the color grading. That's the point where it got real choppy and frames were dropping. So keep that in mind. If for some reason you need to go back and tweak your edit after color grading, you'll probably need to bypass your grades or change the resolution. So project's finished, save and reboot because I already learned that lesson. And then I just output the 4K project to the YouTube H.264 default, and the total render time was about 41 minutes. Now, this was 4K source footage rendered on a 4K timeline output in 4K, which is the way I always thought it should be done and basically what the Resolve manual says to do. However, I did have to go back and tweak my callouts, and when I rendered the project, I left the timeline at 1080p, and the render only took 29 minutes this time. And the final files were virtually identical in size, had virtually identical bit rates, and most importantly, they looked to me anyway, identical in playback. I'm not exactly sure why the significant time difference for what looks like identical outputs. My guess is it has something to do with processing the playback on the delivery tab while simultaneously rendering. So please, if there are Resolve professionals watching, please tell the amateur the real reason in the comments. So that was my experience editing on the M1 Mac Mini, but how does it compare to a comparably priced PC? And let me start by saying that I've been building PCs for nearly 30 years, and I'll concede right up front that I can't build a PC at this form factor with this ultra low power usage. Right off the bat, the M1 Mac Mini has the best performance per watt of pretty much any desktop available. But for anyone who follows my channel, you know one of the key points I make is price to performance. So I built a $700 PC to see how it compares to the Mac. This is actually the PC I built in the video you just watched me edit, and those are the specs. Yes, it's like 10 times bigger and draws 10 times more power, and the specs aren't exactly the same. The PC has 16 gigabytes of memory, and the Mac only has 8, but the Mac has an 8-core CPU and the PC only has a 4-core, but the goal was to see how a $700 PC performs in comparison to this $700 Mac in Resolve. So I exported the final version of the PC build project I just went over with you, with all the gradings and stills to the external SSD, and then imported it into Resolve on the PC. I made sure all the media was properly linked, and then I spent quite a bit of time scrubbing around and playing back the timeline and in the Fusion tab. And on the PC, I was actually doing this on a full resolution 4K timeline with all the grading enabled, and it was really smooth with no issues, except there were times when I made a big jump from one point in the timeline to another that I was greeted with the red media offline screens. However, it would pop in within a few seconds. This didn't happen at all when I switched to an HD timeline, so I would say that on an HD timeline, the two systems perform the same in the timeline on the edit tab, which was pretty much perfectly. However, I was able to work on a 4K timeline in the completed project on a PC, but couldn't really do that on the Mac. The one advantage I saw for the Mac was the speed in which it rendered the Fusion compositions to cache. On the Mac, it was set to ProRes 422, and on the PC, I did it in DNxHR, I'm pretty sure, and it was noticeably faster on the Mac. Now, as far as outputting the project, this is where the PC does pull away significantly, rendering out the project with the same settings in half the time. I apologize for the footage here. My capture card decided to stop working for me. I never said PCs were perfect. Anyway, that was 20 minutes on a 4K timeline, and just like the Mac, it did it considerably faster on an HD timeline, and again, with the same visual fidelity. Now, this is a result of one, a more powerful GPU. Resolve has awesome hardware acceleration and will use whatever GPU you have at or very near 100% to render the RGB data and the CPU for encoding and decoding the video. So the more powerful the GPU and CPU, the faster the project will output, and usually better timeline playback and response, as the GPU is used for that too. The second advantage is the ability to use the NVIDIA NVENC encoder for hardware H.264 encoding and decoding on the PC, so the CPU is really not under any load, while the Mac used software encoding and needed the CPU for that. But let's flip things. If you're not uploading your finished work to, say, YouTube, you might not care about H.264, and you want higher quality output, so I output the project as ProRes 422 LT on the Mac and DNxHR LB on the PC. Here the Mac took just about 2 minutes more than it did with the H.264 file, but the PC did it in just over 22 minutes. However, the data rate of the ProRes video was more than double the DNxHR output, and most importantly, the visual quality of the ProRes video is much better. The color accuracy is better and the image is clearer overall. This actually looks like what I did in the color tab. But what did I think about the Resolve experience on the Mac Mini? Overall, I'd say it was pretty good. No real complaints about the editing, timeline, or color grading performance. And while outputting to H.264 is slow compared to a comparably priced PC, if you're outputting to a higher quality format, the Mac really does shine. Now, finally, would I recommend this Mac over a PC like this one as an editing workstation? Well, that's where I have to go with the old cop-out and say it depends. Because first and foremost, 8 gigabytes of memory just isn't enough in my opinion. I saw that throughout both projects I completed on the Mac. Resolve was consistently using more than 8 gigabytes of physical memory, which means it had to continually swap data to the SSD, which hinders performance. So I would say the 16 gigabyte option would be much better, but now you're at a $900 price point and all you got was another 8 gigs of RAM. With another $200, I can upgrade this with an 8-core CPU or an 8 gigabyte graphics card, or maybe a 6-core CPU and 32 gigabytes of RAM. The point is, the upgrade path on a PC is vast, while the Mac Mini can only be what it is. Not that what it is bad, but if you outgrow it, I mean, you can try to sell it and get a better model, which is not always a bad option, and Apple products do seem to keep a much better resale value than PC components. So let me be less non-committal in my recommendation. If you're just editing 8-bit 4K or 1080p or similar footage, if the low power consumption, small form factor, and silence, that's a big plus for the Mac, it's silent. If the Apple ecosystem or Mac OS is important to you, then yes, the base model M1 Mac Mini is a solid option. If all that stuff is true, but you have plans to edit more complex footage, 10-bit, 6 or 8K, and $900 is no big deal to you, then go with the 16 gigabyte model. If you really don't care what you work on and just want the best performance for the money and want to be able to upgrade and tailor your system as needed, then go with a PC. But that's it. I'm sure you all will fill me in on your thoughts on all of this. But next, I'll be testing out After Effects and Photoshop on the Mac, and then I'll be moving on to some 3D workflows in Fusion 360 and Cura. So if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to click the thumbs up on your way out. I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe.